My name's Tony Roome. I'm the chair of RYA's Inland Navigation Panel, and I'm here today with John Dodwell, who's one of the trustees of the new Canal and River Trust. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Tony.
This must be an exciting time for you as somebody on the trust, as a trustee who's got a lot of boating experience. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yes, it's a tremendous step forward for the inland waterways. As you know, for years they've been under government control through the British Waterways Board. People like the Inland Waterways Association and the RYA have been saying that should change, one should get out of government control. And various people have been trying to do that. British Waterways tried 10 years ago, and out of that we had the Waterways Trust. But now another attempt has been made, government has listened, and now it's all being transferred away from Whitehall to a brand new charity, which will indeed be among the top 20 charities in the UK. As you know, I've been involved in inland waterways for more than 50 years. I own a boat, I fished, I canoed, I dinghy sailed, I sailed a yacht in the Norfolk Broads, so I bring a fair amount of waterway knowledge as well as business experience to the new trust.
That's good to hear, because I think it's important that the trust has that sort of experience at the highest level. Can we talk a bit about the trust then? Maybe we start with finance. It's the crunch point, I guess, for most people. We hear a lot, first of all, about BW wanting to maintain a steady state or being able to maintain steady state. Can you tell us what steady state actually is?
A steady state has tended to be a rather mysterious concept, but it's broadly the estimate of the annual money needed to maintain the waterways in a serviceable condition, assuming they are already there. It's not going to maintain them in tip-top condition, but it's going to make sure they don't collapse.
And do we think we're at steady state now, so it's a question of the trust maintaining that, or is there still work to be done to get up to that level?
There's work to be done, but in the last few years, great efforts have been made on the main infrastructure, aqueducts, locks, embankments, tunnels, and there is a way of measuring these according to their likelihood to collapse and the effect of that, and they're graded A for good and E to a bit dodgy. Over 10 years ago, for 30% were in the D and E category. Now it's 16%, with virtually nothing in the E category. So a lot of the money the last few years have gone into the basic infrastructure. Now that has meant that things like sanitary stations and cutting the grass has had to take a bit of a back seat. Not that it hasn't been done, but it hasn't been done as much as it might be. Now, one would hope going forward, we can improve on that. We've got some figures that show at the moment we're achieving about 82% of steady state, and in 3 years' time we hope to have that up to 94%.
That's great. That's really good to hear. The government announced in big headline figures £1 billion of funding for the trust. But out of that, isn't a large chunk of that already earmarked for things like BW Scotland or Scottish Canals, as it will be, and also to the pension fund because of the deficit that's been inherited?
There is some money allocated to it. The British Waterways as an entity with England, Wales and Scotland. England and Wales is being hived off to the new trust, so British Waterways continues in Scotland. So they had to divide the assets up between England and Wales on one hand and Scotland on the other. And that's been done, the special committee sat, and that does involve paying £10 million over to Scotland over the next 3 years. So out of the billion is not very much. You mentioned the pension fund.
Yeah.
That is a serious matter because clearly we have to look after the interests of all the pensioners and indeed existing staff who hope to become pensioners. The government have contributed 25 million towards that deficit. So again, out of the 1 billion, not very much.
Okay, so at the moment, going back to the steady state comments, it's taking roughly 100 to 120 million a year, depends on whose figures you take, to maintain steady state. And BW has been spending 90 million a couple of years ago, 70 million this year, and yet the government grant to the trust runs at the rate of 39 million a year for the next 4 years. So are you confident that there's going to be enough money in the trust?
Yes, I'm confident. Bear in mind that the new trustees have had to form a view whether the trust is viable. They were in the position to say to government, it doesn't work. Indeed, that's exactly what we did say. The government's first offer was 39 million over 10 years. And I remember last autumn, a reporter from a planning magazine saying, if you've been offered 39 million for 10 years by the government, if you turn that down in the current economic environment, you're crazy. And I said, well, we are crazy, we have turned it down. So instead of 390 million over 10 years, we ended up with nearly 800 million spread over 15 years. Now that 15-year contract is immensely valuable. It gives us a bedrock to plan maintenance, which poor British Waterways never had. We can plan knowing we won't get government cuts in grants. British Waterways sometimes found their grant got cut during the year. So it makes an enormous difference. I should also point out that our total income is about 150 million. And it's roughly, very roughly, 1/3 government, 1/3 from our property endowment fund. We own a lot of property along the waterways up and down the country, which produces rents. We also make money from allowing cable companies to put their cables in the towpath. We make money from the sale of water, and we get money, obviously, from boat owners through their licences and their mooring fees. So the government's 39 million needs to be seen in context of the other income.
Okay, and one of the income streams you mentioned was from the property portfolio.
Yes.
We've heard certainly on websites and in the press that BW made some losses on some of its property investments. Is that true, and is it likely to be repeated in future? And if so, how is the trust going to deal with that?
Well, it is true. If you're involved in property development, you have some downs as well as ups. What the websites have tended to ignore is the upside. Over the last 10 years, British Waterways have managed the whole property portfolio very well. The vast majority of it is in investment property with basic rents coming in, so there's no speculative building. And over the last 10 years, they've beaten the property index produced by the IPD. As I think you know, Tony, there was talk of the government taking the property away. The government was persuaded the management was running it better than it could be done else how, and so decided to leave the property. And that's a fundamental bedrock to our future. We've got 460 million worth of property as part of the whole deal, and that generates income of over 30 million. There is now a 250-year lease with Canary Wharf Group producing 6 million a year and rising. So that's an upside and very long-term income. In addition, the 50 million coming back is part of our investment endowment fund. If you think of jam jar pots on the mantelpiece, there is the investment pot and the spending pot. The investment pot produces rents and other income to go into the spending pot. And what's in the investment pot stays there. It's a kind of the family silver, not for sale. So the 50 million which has come back from Canary Wharf will be invested in new things. If you get a yield of 7%, that's another £3.5 million. So out of those two deals, there's 10 million of income. Now there was some basic income already, but that's the upside, which the websites are a little quieter about.
Yes. It doesn't always do to report the good side. Finally, on the finance side, figures of something like 10 million a year for charitable giving, for donation income for the trust have been forecast. How realistic do you really think that 10 million is? It seems a large figure to me.
Well, that's 10 million net of costs. That's the target in 15 years' time. It's not the target tomorrow. Now, among my fellow trustees, we have someone from Oxfam, someone who was with the Charity Commission, and they looked at the figures and they thought they were on the low side. So when I've got experts like that telling me they're underestimates, I tell the fundraisers they got to raise more than 10 million. But again, put it in context, 150 million is not a large amount of money, although obviously every extra penny helps. A point I ought to make, Tony, under the BW regime, if they saved money, the reaction from government was to say, thank you very much, we'll reduce the grant. Now in future, every penny raised, every penny earned, every penny saved on maintenance, we're going to keep.
That's good to know. Thanks for the finance side then. Maybe we can look at one of our other concerns or the areas of concern. We believe there's a big need for a change of culture between BW and the Trust. And we don't just mean moving from the public sector to a charitable organisation, but also to put boating at the heart of the new Trust. How do you react to that?
We need to remember that the old British Waterways Board reported to DEFRA and to one minister. The current minister, as you know, is very keen, but that can't be said about all the previous ministers. So from being an organisation accountable to DEFRA and trying to fend off outside critics, we're going to turn to an organisation, indeed we have turned to an organisation which encompasses outsiders and welcomes all the massive support that people like the RYA and others over the years have been offering.
One of our concerns has always been about the membership of the Trust. We've always believed that, like RYA, there should be an empowered membership who should have the power to actually question the trustees and the council and so on. At the moment, that isn't an option. We've only got the Friends. Is there any plan to change that for the future?
There's no plans at the moment, Tony, because we only began on the 1st of July, so it'd be a bit early to change what we've got. But we said we want to work to a system where the National Council is 50% elected from those organisations who are large enough, or those groups of entities who are large enough. We already have names and addresses of all the boat owners, all the people who work for us, and all the harbour boat firms and boat yards, etc. So those are three groups where we know entities, and we've already had elections within those three groups. Yeah. I can see, and don't hold me to this please, because it's not my decision, I can see we'll get to a stage where the Friends will be a large enough group, and also the volunteers, which are very important to us, and perhaps we'll talk a bit more about those in a moment. There will be another constituency who can elect. But even before we get there, we will have an annual meeting open to everybody. And the Waterway Partnerships will have their annual meetings each year. So anybody can turn up. And if anybody wants to ask any question any time, then my email address is john.dodwell@canalandrivertrust.org.uk. So please ask me and forgive me if I then pass the question on to someone who's better able to answer it.
That's excellent. Thank you for that. And I'm not sure we won't still like to see in the long term a proper membership of the organisation, but I can see where things have got to now. And one of the perennial complaints, I suppose, is dredging. We all suffer from that at one time or another. Are there specific CRT plans to deal with dredging? Is it a continuation of the BW system? How will it work?
Well, it will be a continuation, but it will involve more dredging. The steady state model you mentioned earlier shows there should be about £9 million spent. Last year was about £5 million. Part of the parliamentary process involved giving evidence on this point, and it was hoped that we would increase the spend to £10 million in 2015. Parliament was also told there's a backlog of 40 million, so there's a long way to go. The broad policy is urban canals, which has got good solid towpaths, and thus there is less erosion of the bank. They need to be dredged every 40 years. The rural canals, where the banks are more susceptible to erosion, every 25 years. Now that's not, we need to distinguish between spot dredging for obstacles in bridges or where a stream comes in bringing muck with it, and basic dredging. And certainly the dredging programme is being more streamlined. I can assure you, Tony, with my boat drawing 3 feet depth along its 51 feet length, My fellow trustees and the senior management are very much aware of my views on the need for the bottom to be further from the top.
Is there anything else you want to add? Is there anything else we
Just
haven't
one
covered that
last
you want to put
thing.
in?
If you go on our website, you will have the opportunity to become a friend and pay if you wish. Well, I'm conscious that boat owners already pay. A lot of the friend activity is aimed at people on the towpath, but there's no reason why you and I can't also become a friend and generally join in what the new trust is doing.
I think
be part of the future.
RYA certainly will stay as a friend, perhaps a critical friend, but nevertheless a friend of the organisation. Good luck for the launch later this week, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Tony.